excitement you're after, come fishing with the experts from 3M Scientific Anglers and learn ways to catch more and bigger trout on the fly. You'll learn where to find trout in a stream and ways to present the right fly with the perfect cast so you can catch the most elusive trout during hatch and non-hatch situations. Plus, there's steelheading for 20-pound rainbows or going for the ultimate saltwater challenge. Let 3M Scientific Anglers bring home the excitement while you learn a lifetime of mastery techniques that will help you become the best fly fisherman you can be. Imagine the perfect day. A quiet pool all to yourself. The trout are rising. And you pick just the right fly. Your cast is graceful and accurate. A strike, and it's a duel between you and the fish. A contest that can have only one conclusion. A day full of memories and a sleek fish sliding back into the stream to fight another day. Can you see yourself in that situation? Do you have what it takes to find and catch trout consistently? Can you cast your fly into even the toughest locations? Are you able to develop a strategy that will fool even the most selective trout? And then adapt your strategy to changing conditions. This program can help put you on the road to mastery of the sport. It shows you the reasons why the experts are so successful at catching trout on flies. And when you understand the whys behind a sport, the how-tos make a lot more sense. In this program, Doug Swisher will demonstrate the casting techniques and fly fishing strategies that will help you succeed in the sport. Rick Hayfley, author of Western Hatches and a stream biologist, will help you analyze the anatomy of a trout stream and fish each part of it effectively. Gary Borger, author and professor, will show you how to be the master tactician, pulling together all the elements of fly fishing to catch more trout more consistently. Each of these experts has his own program or series of programs in the Mastery Fly Fishing series from 3M Scientific Anglers. In those programs, the experts teach you their own ideas and unique techniques. But they all have one thing in common. They catch fish by following a basic formula, a formula for success. And by following that formula, you can increase your level of success and enjoyment. The 3M Mastery Formula for Success has three main factors. The first factor is location. Expert fly fishers know that the trout's environment affects every aspect of the sport. The characteristics of a stream determine specific locations where you'll find trout. By reading the water to find those locations, experts catch more trout and bigger trout than the average angler. Behavior is the second factor in our formula for success. To catch more trout, experts focus on their eating behavior, what they eat and where they find it, how they identify their food, and how that food can be imitated with a fly. The third factor is presentation, the techniques and strategies you must use to catch trout. Experts know that presentation is determined by the trout's location and behavior, your choice of fly, your rod, reel, and line system, your casting technique, your overall strategy. They're all determined by what the trout are eating and where in the stream they are feeding. Put them all together, finding the right locations, understanding the trout's feeding behavior, using the best presentation, and you will dramatically increase your fly fishing success. This one program cannot tell you everything about the sport, but it will explain each factor in the 3M Mastery Formula for success, the essential knowledge you need to go fly fishing. Then you can expand your knowledge with other 3M Mastery programs. By following the formula for success, you will begin your journey on the road to mastery of the sport. The trout is a creature of its environment, the constantly flowing waters of a stream. There are trout in lakes, of course, but this program deals with fly fishing for trout in streams and rivers. To master the sport of fly fishing, you must understand how the trout relates to its environment. The most important concept of location is that you don't find trout everywhere in the stream. You'll find them only in very specific locations, those areas where the stream environment meets the trout's needs for survival. Let biologist Rick Hafley tell you what a trout needs to survive.
Let's look at the needs of a trout. Its needs will dictate where it will be found in the stream and will provide us with clues on how to catch it. The 4 basic needs of the trout are food, protection from currents, safety from predators, and what I call comfort, the temperature and oxygen content of the water. These basic needs will determine where we find trout.
The experts catch more trout because they know where the fish meet their needs for food, shelter, safety, and comfort. When trout are rising to a hatch of aquatic insects, you can easily see where their needs are being met. But as Gary Borger points out, it's not always that easy to find trout.
Many times when you get to the river, there aren't any fish rising, and so it's not obvious where they are. In this case, you've got to be able to locate the places where fish are holding and feeding. Such places are called lies. All lies have to provide protection from swift currents. A sheltering lie, in addition, provides protection from predators. In a riffle like this, the obvious sheltering lie is the deepest part, right down in there. Also, the many weed beds that we see in here can provide shelter for the fish. Feeding lies are places where fish can find food, but they don't get much protection from predators. This flat that I'm standing in is a very good place for fish to move into and feed. But an even better place is across on the other side of this current tongue where all the little eddies are swirling out. Because as food comes floating down the current, it'll swirl out into these small eddies, and the fish can hold beside the fast current and pick off all that food coming down. Prime lies are places where fish can find food and protection from predators simultaneously. In riffly water like that, where the surface is all broken, fish feel protected because they can't see out well, predators can't see in well.
Trout meet their needs for survival in feeding lies, sheltering lies, and prime lies. As Rick Hafley points out, trout must stay in these lies to conserve their energy.
Trout live by a simple formula. The energy they receive from an item of food must be greater than the energy they expend to capture it. This explains why trout will sometimes refuse to move for a single insect. The energy required is simply too great. Throughout this tape, we'll see the implications of this formula in the fly selections and our fishing strategies.
Sometimes lies are easy to spot. For example, every time you come to this stream, there'll probably be a trout under this branch. But as Doug Swisher points out, you have to learn to read the water to find most lies.
The best way to spot lies is to study currents. Watch for the places where currents funnel food into a natural feeding lane, and especially where fast water meets slow water. Areas where these currents of varying speeds come together are called seams. There are many places for trout to lie in this water. However, the most likely places will be the seams, where the fast water meets the slow water. These areas will hold the best fish, and this is where you should concentrate your efforts. Of course, seams aren't the only areas in a stream that hold trout, but they're generally a good place to try, especially when there's little surface activity. Also, look for places where shallow water drops to deep, and where the water changes color from light to dark.
Masters of the sport know that all streams have a common anatomy. That is, the kinds of locations you find in one stream will be repeated in virtually every other river that holds trout. That's important because it means your home waters probably have all the elements of a stream anywhere in the world. For example, a riffle is a riffle, whether it's in a little stream in Pennsylvania, a big river in Montana, or even wilderness steelhead water in British Columbia. By learning your home waters thoroughly, you're preparing yourself to go fly fishing everywhere, from Alaska to the Andes. But before you take off for the far corners of the globe, let's go through the anatomy of a typical trout stream. All streams and rivers have four main types of water: riffles, runs, flats, and pools. Each type of water has its own characteristics in terms of what kinds of lies it offers to the trout and how it should be fished. Let's start this anatomy lesson in a riffle. Riffles are stretches of water that is 1 to 3 feet deep. Riffle water has a rough, choppy surface as it tumbles over the stones and boulders on the bottom. Riffles are good trout water because food is abundant, and the irregular bottom breaks up the current, creating lies for trout. The trick is learning to read riffle water so you can find the best lies. Let Rick Hafley and his friend Henry show you how.
This is Henry. He's got a lot of defects when it comes to being a trout. For instance, when you hook him, all he does is sulk, you break your tippet, lose your fly. But he's a great help when it comes to understanding the anatomy of a trout stream. Remember, as we spot Henry in various lies and riffles, that the biggest trout will hold wherever most of its needs are met. Those will be Henry's favorite lies. Here is Henry in very shallow water. He might feed here during a heavy hatch, but he'd be spooky and get out as soon as the hatch was over. Here is Henry in a deeper riffle. He'll feed less warily here, but he'll still look for shelter when food is scarce. I like to fish current seams like this, where a fast and slow current come together. It's a place where the food is condensed, as demonstrated by these marshmallows floating downstream. These areas can be prime feeding lies, but a fish won't hold here all of the time unless there is protection from the current and the water is at least 2 to 3 feet deep. Here is one of Henry's favorite lies. The boulder gives him relief from the current, the deep water and turbulence behind it protect him from predators, and the current delivers plenty of food. All of his needs are met right here. He'll stay until something moves him out or he's caught. Learn to recognize these places and search them out.
Riffles often, but not always, turn into runs where the water is 3 to 6 feet deep. The current is slower than in a riffle, and the surface is smoother. The occasional boulder creates a boil at the surface and a deep prime lie for the trout.
Trout hold in more specific types of water in runs than they do in riffles. This means they aren't as likely to be sprinkled around, so you have to read the water more carefully to be sure you aren't fishing the barren stretches. Let's let Henry, our cooperative but lethargic trophy trout, show us where he would be happiest in a run. Again, his favorite lies will be chosen based on where the water meets most of his needs in one place. One thing that makes runs tough to fish and attractive to trout is that many of the best lies are often far under the surface and not easily apparent to the angler. One of Henry's favorite lies in a run is up at the head, where a riffle feeds into it or a pool empties. He has the advantage of lots of food here, but also the security of deeper water. Henry likes the edge of any current, or a place where two currents meet, because that's always a place where food gathers, both on the surface and along the bottom. If you imagine this dye were drifting insects, you can see where the food would be concentrated. Rocks, boulders, ledges, logs, or other obstructions that break the current are prime lies that should be fished thoroughly and carefully. It's easy to overlook the banks along the edge of a run. Nearly everybody does, but they offer special places for trout, such as this undercut, and are an important part of the anatomy of any river.
Runs frequently flow into pools where the water is deep and slow. Pools hold some of the biggest trout in the stream because they are also home to some of the biggest bites of food. As Rick Hafley points out, pools offer a special challenge to the fly fisher.
If you look carefully, you can see that pools have their own anatomies. By learning to read them, you can break them down into their parts and fish each part the way they should be fished. The three major parts of a pool are the head, where a run or riffle feeds into the pool, the body, where the water is deepest and slowest, and the tail out, where the water shelves up to break over into the riffle or run below. Let's spot some of the places where we would expect fish to hold in a pool and analyze why we would expect them to hold there. This is the head of a pool. Trout lie in the bottom, along current seams or in eddies, and wait for food washed down from above. This is an area where food is concentrated. You can fish the head of a pool with the same techniques as the run above it if you can position yourself correctly. Too few people change their tactics when moving from riffles and runs to the body of pools. So when they fish there, they don't get their flies to the feeding level of the fish or retrieve them the way the fish in pools are used to seeing their natural food arrive.
The flats are smooth expanses of water 1 to 4 feet deep. The bottom is smooth, too, and current can be fast or slow. On flats, which often have no apparent seams, the expert angler looks for habitat that holds the trout's food, a feeding lie.
As usual, the largest fish will take lies that meet most of their needs in one place. On flats, these are feeding lanes located near some sort of cover. When trout feed actively in flats, you can see them working, and you don't need to read the water to locate them. But you do need to read the water in order to make the proper presentation, and you need to select the fly that imitates the stage of the insect the fish are feeding on. Flats like riffles provide lots of food for insects, and the insect populations are often dense. This results in concentrated hatches, intense feeding periods by fish, and provides great fishing opportunities for the prepared fly fishermen.
You've just seen how expert anglers use the location factor to find and catch more trout more consistently in all kinds of water. Do you have the confidence and knowledge it takes to fish a stream when the trout aren't rising? The location factor will help you pinpoint the trout's feeding lies, sheltering lies, and prime lies. Do you know how to analyze new water and fish it effectively? The location factor will help you master your home waters. Then you can transfer those skills to the riffles, runs, pools, and flats of any other river in the world. The location factor brings you into the trout's home so that you can be a more successful angler. But to catch trout consistently, you'll need more detailed information about the fine points of stream anatomy and what kinds of food each part of the stream holds. Information that you can find in the Mastery Fly Fishing videos and guidebooks from 3M Scientific Anglers. With the location factor, you can read the water and find trout in the stream, or at least find the lies they're probably using. But to consistently catch trout under all kinds of conditions, you have to understand trout behavior, primarily their eating behavior. That means knowing how they select their food, what they eat, and how you can imitate it. Trout are primarily visual feeders. They find and select food based on how it looks in the water. Understanding the trout's vision is one key to catching them. We can tell a lot about a trout by looking at its eyes. They're directed forward to focus clearly on prey. The trout's vision is most acute in a small area, its cone of vision. This cone of vision creates a window through which the trout looks, a characteristic of the trout's behavior that affects your presentation.
Now, when fish are feeding near the surface, they have a very small window. This means they're only seeing the insects in a 2 or 3 inch area over them. This is a very energy efficient way to feed when there's a heavy hatch. But for the fly fisherman, it means you must get your fly exactly down that feeding lane to be effective. Cast that right down the feeding lane. He just took one right ahead of it.
Rick Hafley is tied into a hot fish because he cast the fly into exactly the right spot for the trout to see it. But you have to do more than just get the fly to the trout. The fly must create the right visual impression to trigger a strike. To pick the right fly, you have to understand how the trout sees its food. In most conditions, trout do not have a lot of time to scrutinize their food as it passes by. To survive, trout must make quick decisions on what to eat or what not to eat. Swirling currents and debris in the water often prevent the trout from seeing its food clearly. And when food floats on the surface, the trout sees only a profile or an impression on the water. To pick the right fly, you have to understand that the trout isn't looking for a grasshopper or a stonefly nymph or a minnow as we would see it. The trout looks for a pattern, a visual impression that matches the patterns in its brain, and then it eats. Those patterns are based on three major visual elements: size, shape, and color. This eating system sounds simple, and it has to be because the trout is not a big-brained creature. But simplicity does not mean gullibility. The trout is an expert on what it eats, and matching the trout's food can be one of the most difficult and frustrating aspects of fly fishing. How did the experts master this part of the sport? They follow a process that is based on the behavior factor in our formula for success. The process helps them select a fly that most likely matches the pattern trout are responding to. The experts start with detailed knowledge of what food is available to the trout. Despite their reputation as picky eaters, trout eat just about anything in the stream they can get their mouths around. There are the aquatic insects, mayflies, stoneflies, caddisflies, and midges. Terrestrial insects like ants, grasshoppers, jassids, and beetles fall into the stream or are blown in from surrounding habitat. Trout also eat small aquatic animals and fishes like minnows, frogs, crayfish, sculpins, leeches, and trout fry. By understanding the anatomy of a stream, expert anglers can predict what food is available to a trout in a particular stretch of water. For example, stonefly nymphs need the well-oxygenated waters of a riffle. Midges often hatch out near vegetation. You'll find them in calm water with a silty bottom, areas like pools and flats. And the still waters of a pool hold the bigger bites of food that feed big trout. However, even the most knowledgeable anglers take the time to sample a stream and find out what food is available to trout, both on the bottom and on the surface. Most of the time, trout are feeding opportunistically. If no one type of food is the most abundant, then several fly patterns may be effective. But when there's an active hatch of aquatic insects, one type of food becomes the most abundant and available to the trout. Then trout become highly selective. To conserve energy and make the most of this feeding opportunity, the trout's eating system locks onto the form of food that is abundant and is the easiest to catch and eat. The master angler deals with this selective behavior by carefully studying aquatic insects and their life cycles. At any point in the hatch, trout will select the life cycle stage that is most abundant and easiest to catch and eat. Experts use this knowledge to pick the right fly and present it at the feeding level of the trout. For example, mayfly nymphs spend their lives on the stream bottom and then rise to the surface as the hatch begins. So, at the beginning of the hatch, a nymph imitation must drift near the stream bottom. But as more of the nymphs rise to the surface, the master angler adds a swimming motion to the fly's drift. At the surface, the adult mayfly emerges from its pupal shuck. The emerger struggles through the surface film, and many fail to get free of the shuck. Emergers are easy for trout to catch and eat, and at a key point in the hatch, trout will select this stage. The emerger imitation must ride in the surface film, because at this stage, that is the feeding level of the selective trout. A fly that floated high on the surface would probably be rejected. The adult form, known as a dun, floats on the surface for a short time to dry its wings. The dun imitation must float high on the surface too. The dun flies to streamside trees or vegetation. There it molts again to become the sexually mature spinner. The spinners mate, and the female returns to the water to lay its eggs and then die, a spent spinner. The spent spinner imitation floats low on the water, almost in the surface film. That's the level where trout will be feeding on the naturals. Each species of aquatic insect has its own life cycle, and each stream has its own pattern of insect hatches that is the same year after year. When the hatch is on, the action is fast and furious. You need a quick and accurate process for selecting the right fly to match the hatch. Doug Swisher is a master of that process.
Don't keep trying pattern after pattern just because you like the looks of them. Your chance of coming up with the right fly using this random selection method is probably less than 100 to 1. These are the criteria for selecting the right fly: size, shape, and color in that order. Size is the most important factor when it comes to matching the hatch. After a fish has taken a few naturals, he knows exactly what size they are and becomes very selective. Most anglers have a tendency to fish flies that are larger than the naturals because bigger flies are easier to see. Worry more about getting the size right than seeing your fly.
The smaller the natural, the more critical the size factor becomes. For example, a natural midge is only about 3 millimeters long. A fly that is 4 millimeters long is off by 1/3, and midging trout will reject it. Shape, or profile, is the next most important factor in selecting a fly.
If the natural has an upright, opaque wing, like a mayfly dun, so should your artificial. If it has translucent wings laid flat, then your artificial should too.
Color is the least critical of the three factors, but sometimes can be very important. Get the general color right if you can, but don't worry about having the exact shade. If you must decide between a light and a dark fly, pick the darker one.
Remember, in order to be accurate in matching size, shape, and color, you must catch the natural. Get one at all costs, even if you have to walk over into the line of drift where the fish are feeding. Go ahead and put them down. They'll be up again.
The trout's ability to see your fly varies from location to location, and that affects the type of fly you choose. In riffly water, trout have less time to look at the fly and cannot see it well. A more impressionistic, fully hackled pattern floats high on the surface and may be effective. In slow currents, where the surface is smooth, the trout have more time to look at the fly, and they can see the fly's features more clearly. Those conditions require a more realistic pattern, like this no-hackle imitation of a mayfly dun. When you choose between realistic and impressionistic patterns, remember to think about how the trout sees the fly. For example, this realistic fly appears to be a close match to a nymph, but when you put it in the water, it looks lifeless. A more impressionistic fly looks less like a natural insect to our eyes, but in the water, it comes alive. The pulsating fibers create the same visual impression in the trout's eyes as the fluttering movements of the natural. By thinking in terms of size, shape, and color, you can select a fly that matches the naturals. But there is one more visual factor that affects your choice of fly, and that's motion. In many cases, the trout's food has no motion. For example, most insects, either aquatic or terrestrial, struggle aimlessly or simply drift in the current. So, to match the visual pattern of the trout's food, your fly must drift with the current. But as Gary Borger explains, the forces of the stream create drag and work against your ability to achieve a natural presentation.
Drag is the single most important problem that you have to overcome in dry fly fishing. Drag occurs when the currents pull against the line and cause the fly to skate across the surface. It is absolutely essential that you be able to fish the fly drag-free if the naturals are floating drag-free on the surface.
When the trout's food is floating drag-free or drifting drag-free in the current, it's not enough to just pick a fly that matches the natural. If your fly has even the slightest amount of drag, it will not match the visual pattern the trout is looking for, and you won't get a strike. As you'll see in the next part of this program, you must be able to cast the fly properly and manipulate the line on the water to prevent drag. In other fly fishing situations, you must add motion to make the presentation work. For example, streamers imitate minnows and other types of trout prey that have their own motion. You add a pulsating, darting motion to the fly as you strip it in. Without that key visual action, a trout may not strike the fly. And sometimes the naturals aren't floating drag-free. They're kicking, flying, and spinning over the surface. And that motion is part of the visual pattern trout are looking for. Then you have to add that motion with skittering, a technique often used with caddis imitations.
To really make that fly look alive, wiggle your right wrist as you strip with your left hand. And that'll double the speed and make that fly come across in a more erratic fashion, more like the natural. Strip with your left, shake your hand with your right. And that fly will just bounce across the riffles and it'll look like the real thing to a fish.
Too often, do you simply pick a fly because it looks good to you? The behavior factor will help you look at a fly from the trout's point of view. Are you able to pick the best fly when the hatch is on? Can you successfully fish all stages of the hatch? The behavior factor helps you understand what food is available to the trout and how the trout are behaving to get that food. Do you know when to select a realistic pattern over an impressionistic fly? When to fish drag-free, or when you must add motion to the fly? Can you deal with fine differences in the trout's feeding level? The behavior factor helps you understand all the elements that trigger the strike of a trout. You don't have to be a trained biologist to understand the behavior factor and catch more trout. The video programs in the Fly Fishing Mastery series from 3M Scientific Anglers can give you the detailed information you need to master the sport. In our formula for success, the presentation factor is where you have to put it all together. Someone else can take you to the right location on a stream. They can even tell you how the trout are behaving and pick a fly that matches the behavior. But you have to make the presentation work, and that means you have to be able to cast. Of course, having the right equipment is essential to making a good presentation. The programs and guidebooks in 3M's Fly Fishing Mastery series take you through all the details of selecting the right equipment. What to look for in a good rod and reel. How to pick the right tippet and leader combinations. Which lines to use. Then how to tie the strongest, most efficient knots. But remember that no one becomes a master by simply ordering every item in the catalog. You cannot substitute equipment for casting skills. To master the art of fly casting, you must understand the basic concepts and principles behind the sport. In his two-part series, Basic and Advanced Fly Casting, Doug Swisher takes you from the basics to the ultimate challenges of fly casting. Let him give you a condensed lesson on the elements of fly casting mastery, starting with the basics of arm movement.
Another important basic in fly casting is that the arm contributes to the straight line movement of the rod tip. In the old-fashioned style of casting, where you pinned your arm to your side, it was almost impossible to make the rod tip go in a straight line. It went in a big old semicircle, a big old arc. By freeing the arm, it's much easier to make the rod tip drive in a nice straight line. Good casting is not continuous arcing movements. Instead, it's straight line, stop and go movements. Straight back, straight ahead. The primary physical skill of a good caster is a smooth, controlled, microsecond wrist. I think you can see that the wrist is definitely the power of the cast. The key is learning to snap the wrist in a straight line, so you drive the rod tip in a straight line right to the target. And the quicker you snap the wrist, the tighter the loop. If you have a slow wrist, the rod tip drops out of a straight line, the loop is too wide. Keep it fast, and it also will load the rod and add a lot more impetus to your cast. Believe me, the key to good casting is to develop what I call the microsecond wrist.
Fly casting is a visual improvement sport. Doug reminds you to watch what you are doing. That's how you can tell if you're doing it right or wrong. It's a habit to continue, even after you become an accomplished fly caster. The key visual feature to watch is the shape of your line. It forms a front loop and a back loop. You're trying to achieve a perfect loop where the top and bottom are parallel. An open loop and a closed loop indicate problems in your casting technique that you can correct. In his programs, Doug points out other visual features to look for.
In every casting stroke, there's a beginning and an ending to the wrist snap. If you start snapping the wrist with the rod in this position and end it there, you form what I call the piece of pie. Snap it there to there, a piece of pie. Now let me show you some variations on the pie and point out the importance to your casting.
If you move the rod no more than 90 degrees or a quarter of a pie, your loop should be well formed and fairly tight. If you move the rod through half a pie, the loop will be too wide. If you try to bite off a piece of pie that is too small, your loops may tangle. Keep your piece of pie at 90 degrees.
To have the versatility you need to cover any fishing situation, I feel strongly you should be able to cast in every plane and handle every angle. It'll look something like this. Just apply your basic stroke and practice sidearm on your casting side. Bring it right on up over your head, all the way to the other side, until you're comfortable with every angle. Then work on your angles of tilt, down, straight ahead, and high. Learn to handle all the angles and planes.
Doug takes the complex art of fly casting and breaks it down into simple skills that you can learn in practice. Then he puts those simple skills together in the basic presentation casts. The straight line cast, the slack line cast for drag-free floats, and the roll cast for situations where you have no room for a back cast. With those three basic casts, you can get your fly to the trout in almost any fishing situation. But getting your fly to the trout is only part of the challenge. To catch trout, your fly must look like the trout's natural food, and in most cases, that means it must be floating drag-free. The ability to make long drag-free floats, even in the most difficult conditions, is the mark of a master fly caster. Doug Swisher feels the reach cast is one of the best ways to put slack in your system for longer, drag-free floats.
Here's the way it looks. Cast vertically with a wide loop. That means a slow wrist. Tilt forward. Now, we're going to change directions with a cast 90 degrees with even power. Now, we'll take it off in the other direction. Even power. You just sort of paint the line and you keep the thumb on top of the cork all the way through the cast. Don't twist your wrist. Now, here's the way it looks in a fishing situation. I'll throw over here towards the bank. We've got some bushes with a slow current, and if I lay it in with an extreme reach, I'm in very dead water with the fly, and I get a much longer float than if I'd use slack line. Now we'll take it in even a little further. It just gives you a greater angle on that fish.
The reach cast works by putting more slack line upstream from the fly. In some situations, even the reach cast is not enough. Then you must apply the curve cast.
Here's the setup for that positive curve. You're going to cast a tight loop, flat out, parallel to the water. Keep it good and tight with a microsecond wrist, and at the last second, you're going to stop the rod, and the line will kick around. Now, here's what it looks like. A nice tight loop. Drive a straight line with your rod tip. Make sure your loops are lined up. Now, stop the rod, and the line will kick around. Let's do that again. Get your loops going nice and tight. Stop the rod dead, and it'll kick around nicely. The mistake you might make when you try it is not stopping at the right point. If you go past the stopping point, it won't curve. So the key is not to change your technique between false cast and delivery cast.
By combining the basic cast with advanced techniques like the reach and curve cast, you can make a perfect drag-free presentation from any angle on the stream, a concept that Doug calls fishing the clock. As Doug demonstrates, casting skills can take you to the spots that few other anglers can fish.
Okay, this is a great looking pool. We're gonna cover it with some dry fly attractors up on top. I got Omatum X tied on here. Now, out in the middle, I see some good cover, but probably the best stuff's over on the far side. So we'll take a couple of short casts first. We do wanna throw over some good fish. Make sure we fan our way across. Now the next cast, we'll go over a little further, out into the center of the current. Good old control system, line over the finger, go with the flow. Okay, now we'll try the far side of that tongue, and just as I suspected, I got a faster current between me and my fly. It's coming from the left, so that means an upstream reach, kind of like that. Now my fly should stay in there longer. Okay, keep that system fairly tight, go with the flow. Now, you can bet your bottom dollar the best fish are probably in the toughest place to cast. So I'm gonna drill a couple back in there, over near those flowers. I think you can see how slow that fly's moving and how fast the fly line's going. Fish it way down now. Gonna throw in even further. Nice tight loop, way back under the overhanging branches. This time I'm even gonna put a curve on it, see if I can stay over there longer. Kind of like that. Now, a little trick is when that line starts to bow, just pick your rod tip up and then drop it quickly, and you've straightened the system, and you're off on another float. You can do that a number of times on one float down through a pool, and you cover different segments of the pool. Well, now we'll try to get one real close to that bush over there. Looks like there's good overhead cover. Yep, threw a little too far. Let's go back in with it. There, we bounce it right under. Right under. Come on, gotta be something in that nice looking spot. Good cover. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
By knowing the anatomy of this location, Doug spotted the most likely prime lie, the overhanging brush. But he also knew there could be fish in the middle of the pool. That's why he carefully worked his way across the pool, rather than casting right to the prime lie. With no active hatch, Doug knew the trout could be feeding opportunistically. The attractor fly is an impressionistic pattern that imitates the general features of floating insects. But, as a floating insect, it must be presented drag-free. His casting techniques enable him to get a long, drag-free float, and the confidence he has in his casting ability lets him put the fly right under the brush, a tough location, again and again. By using the formula for success, he gets a big trout in a spot many average anglers wouldn't even attempt to fish. Do you find yourself passing up the best locations because you can't cast to them? The presentation factor shows you how to get the fly into the toughest spots that often hold the biggest trout. Do you waste time wading into position because you're good at only one or two casts? The presentation factor shows you how to use a variety of casts to fish more efficiently. Casting skills are the foundation of fly fishing success. The Fly Fishing Mastery Series from 3M Scientific Anglers can help you expand your skills and increase your enjoyment of the sport. We've explained each of the factors in 3M's Mastery Formula for success: location plus behavior plus presentation. Now, let's watch Gary Borger put them into practice. Then you'll get a chance to fish along with Gary and test your own knowledge of the formula for success. Gary is working his way up a typical western stream, fishing every type of water in its anatomy. Now, he's going to apply the formula for success to a riffle. Given the knee-deep waters in this location, Gary knows that any portion of it could be a prime lie for trout feeding at the surface or below. He uses his knowledge of the trout's food and behavior to pick a presentation.
Earlier today, I sampled this riffle and found lots of these pale morning dun mayfly nymphs. As you can see, there's no mayflies hatching now, so this would be a very good time to fish with an imitation of these nymphs. Mayfly nymphs are not very good swimmers, so a very effective way to fish them is to simply cast them upstream and allow them to drift back to you at the same speed as the current. You can do this quite nicely with a roll cast.
By applying his knowledge of the stream's anatomy, Gary develops a strategy for fishing this location.
Now, when you fish riffles, the temptation is to make just a couple of casts and say no fish and move on again. But a much better approach is to very systematically cover the riffle, and I use what's called the shotgun tactic for this. Pick out a block of water about 10 by 10 feet in front of me, upstream about 10 feet, and fish that area intensively. Maybe make 20, 30 casts into that area.
Gary knows that in this swift current, the trout cannot afford to waste energy, and they will strike only when the food comes to them. And the turbulent water reduces visibility for the trout, reducing the odds that they will even see the fly. So, Gary ups his odds by thoroughly combing the location.
Just roll cast the line up, and as it floats back to you, lift the rod. And when the fly is through that area that you want to fish, just bring it back and make another roll cast right back upstream again.
Notice how efficient the roll cast is in this location. The roll cast lets Gary spend more time fishing and less time casting.
There he is. When you're playing fish in fast water like this, you daresn't pull too hard or you'll tear the hook out or break the tippet off. So just put gentle pressure on the fish. And I like to play the fish from the reel. I don't like to just strip in line. If you strip line and then step on it or something, the fish makes a run, it'll break off. So pick the line up on the reel and play the fish from the reel. This is a pretty decent fish. Ooh, look at him go. Holy cow.
Gary Borger has just used the location factor to determine where the trout are holding and at what level they are feeding. The behavior factor helped him think about what the trout are eating and how that food should be imitated. The presentation factor led him to the right choice of line, leader, and tippet, and the most efficient and effective casting technique. Now, how would you apply the formula for success here? It's a special kind of location known as pocket water. Start by reading the water. Where would you expect the trout to be holding? Compare your ideas to Gary Borger's analysis of the situation.
Concentrate your efforts where they'll do the most good. And that means fishing the pockets. Now, pockets contain the same types of lies that pools do. Back in the tail of the pocket, there are feeding lies. You can see the current spinning out into the tail of the pocket, so any food organisms floating down in the current would spin out there into the tail to the waiting fish. There's also a feeding lie right in front of the boulder where there's a hydraulic cushion, and fish will hold there oftentimes and feed. And that's always worth a cast or two. And then don't forget the concepts of the feeding lane and concentration of currents. Wherever you have a concentration of currents like this, you have a concentration of food items, and you'll have fish moving in there to feed. So places like this would be very good places to fish with the dry fly.
There's no apparent hatch going on right now. So how would you pick a fly to use? Gary knows that there are frequent mayfly hatches on this river, so the trout may respond to a dun imitation. The choppy surface and fast current here indicate that an impressionistic pattern may work well. Now, the trick is to make an effective presentation in this swift water. What would you do? Let's see what strategy Gary uses.
Now, if you're fishing to a fish that's in that feeding lie right above the boulder, you can reach it with a reach mend or a single curve mend. Here's what the reach mend looks like. Cast up and reach it off to the side, the fly comes right down in front of the rock and the line goes right around, just like that. Cast up and reach it right around. Here's the single curve. Cast up, curve the line right around the rock. Cast up, curve the line right around the rock. The fly comes straight down in front of that rock, right into that feeding lie. You got it. Oh, it's a nice rainbow. Look at him jump. Woo! Look at him go. Hot fish. Boy, that fish in that pocket water is exciting. Boy, those fish really take that fly. Bang, they got it, and then down they go. Remember to follow fish like this in this fast water because they'll pull off if you don't. Boy, that was a good run. Then get in that fast water, get your rod over to the side like this. Pressure them a little bit, get them into these quiet pockets along shore. Boy. Tough landing them in this kind of water because tough wading, tough moving. Come on there, fish. Boy, they really use that current to their advantage. Can't get him into this pocket of quiet water here. Ah. There he comes. And that's why I like to fish pockets.
Fly fishing is such a challenging sport because it puts both your physical and mental skills to the test. It's a lifetime activity, and there's always more to learn. With the 3M Mastery Formula for success, you'll have the edge you need to locate trout, understand their behavior, and make the right presentation to catch them. You'll be on the way to making yourself the best fly fisher you can possibly be. There's no other sport like fly fishing. It can truly give you a lifetime of discovery and enjoyment. Whether you fish your own favorite stream or travel the world with your fly rod, there's no end to what you'll learn. To help speed you along your path of discovery, Scientific Anglers from 3M has recruited some of the world's best fly fishermen to produce a complete learning system of videotape programs. Unlike simple how-to videos, the Scientific Anglers Mastery Series shows you more than just tips. It gives you an easy-to-learn formula for success to truly help you become a master angler. There are programs designed to give you a strong foundation of knowledge and skill. At the next level, the Mastery System helps you integrate the skills and knowledge into sophisticated fly fishing strategies. And for the expert, there are challenge-level programs that offer original and innovative techniques to help you master the most difficult fly fishing situation. Think of it as a learning path towards fly fishing mastery. The tape you just viewed is part of that path. In Doug Swisher's Trout series, Scientific Anglers presents a 4-part program that features a natural learning progression. First, there's basic fly casting, where you learn loop control and the principles of throwing a perfect straight line cast. Then you move on to advanced fly casting, building your skills with more complex casting techniques, including curve and reach casts. Now you're ready for action as Strategies for Selective Trout shows you how to fish a hatch from bottom to top. And you'll almost feel the strike as Doug demonstrates ways to take difficult trout in non-hatch conditions. Finally, in Advanced Strategies for Selective Trout, Doug teaches you his most sophisticated methods, including ways to successfully fish the midge, how to unlock the mysteries of masking hatches, and special streamer tactics to catch big trout. You'll be part of the action as you look through the eyes of the expert and learn the real whys behind the mastery of fly fishing for trout. While you're improving your streamside skills, you may also want to learn to tie your own flies. Gary Borger shows you a step-by-step approach to the basics of fly tying. And Doug Swisher demonstrates how to tie flies to match the hatch and his deadly attractor patterns. If you're hooked on catching the big ones, you've got to see the 4-part series on fly fishing for Pacific steelhead. Lonnie Waller and Jim Teeney will provide you with a complete arsenal of skills so that you can take these giant rainbows, even in the most challenging conditions. But that's not all. Scientific Anglers takes you south to watch world record holder Billy Pate demonstrate his secrets of success for hooking up and landing the ultimate fly fishing game. And if you love fishing, hunting, and other sports, think of 3M as your total video resource for outdoor adventure. Thank you for watching this program. We also invite you to stay tuned for samples of other 3M Sportsman's video collection programs. The gentle beauty of a deep forest glade. The heart-pounding excitement of a trophy buck in rut. Going one-on-one with North America's most popular big game animal. That's what deer hunting's all about. And nobody brings you more in-depth information and true-life action than the 3M Sportsman's Video Collection. Explosive action, in-depth information, incredible scenes. 3M Sportsman's Video Collection brings you the world of bass fishing with America's top anglers like Doug Hannon, Ricky Klein, and Al Linder. A comprehensive learning series that'll make you the best bass angler on your lake. You'll be glad you watched these programs when you catch the bass of a lifetime. The excitement of calling a bird into your gun. The satisfaction of making a clean shot. And the companionship of a well-trained dog. If you like the challenge of upland game bird and waterfowl hunting, 3M Sportsman's Video Collection gives you the thrill of being there and the knowledge you need to master the sport.